I think in some ways the worst thing we can do is respond to someone who attacks our faith in such a way that they feel justified in attacking us.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Saints Unscripted. I'm Wilson. I'm going to be one of your hosts today, along with Cam, and we have a very special guest with us today. We have Dr. Jared Halverson, who is a professor of religion at BYU, and also one of the kindest people that I know. We're going to be talking about some really exciting topics today. So I'm probably going to end up calling him Brother Halverson because he also taught me right now.
Wilson and I go back. You can just call me Bro Hal, like in the old days.
Bro Hal, there it is.
You look very well adjusted now that class is over, by the way.
Oh, I like finals out of the way. Like we're feeling good. So,
but I do miss your sister. It was amazing having the two of you in class.
So before we hop into that, would you be okay with just kind of introducing yourself to the audience, kind of giving a breakdown of who you are and what you do?
You bet. As you said, I teach religion at BYU. It's kind of a dream for me, just being able to teach the gospel. Yeah, I grew up in Southern California, in Los Angeles, with a group of amazingly diverse and very devout religiously friends. Yeah, came to BYU as an undergrad myself, planning originally to be an architect, and then went on a mission to Puerto Rico and fell in love with teaching the gospel. So I came back and started teaching at the MTC. Just all kinds of changes where it felt like the Lord was weaning me off of things that he knew there were better things for me to do. I had played football through high school and my freshman year at BYU, go Cougs, and went on my mission, came back. I joked that I had been a wide receiver and I came back a wider receiver. So I decided to hang up the cleats and do something different, right? Yeah, all that rice and beans. But honestly found something that to me meant so much more than catching passes, and that was teaching the gospel. So I dove into a seminary teaching program and tried to prepare myself as best as I could to be able to teach the gospel. Took every religion class you could think of, and thankfully, I was hired by the church and started teaching seminary long ago. Taught seminary for 6 years, went back and taught a year at BYU, and then spent 10 years in Tennessee running the institute program there, which was a blast. And when I was there, I started work on a PhD at the Vanderbilt Divinity School in American religious history. So educationally, that was fascinating, being the token Latter-day Saint at a
in the Bible Belt, right?
Yeah, Bible Belt, liberal Protestant divinity school, surrounded by people, just amazing people who loved religion and knew their stuff, but were open-minded and liked to talk about it. I was there during the Romney campaign, which made it all the more fascinating because everybody wanted to know more about the church at that time, especially in the South. And after getting the PhD there, I study anti-religious rhetoric. So a lot of anti-Mormonism, but if you're a person of faith, you tend to have a target on your chest at some point. And so studying anti-Methodism and anti-Shakerism and anti-Catholicism from a rhetorical standpoint. So how do people say things? What is said? How is it said in such a way that it might weigh heavy on a person's faith to the point that they choose to separate from it? After 8 years there, the church sent me back to Utah. I taught at the University of Utah for 8 years, and despite my Cougar blood, I loved my time among the youths. So it was great experience.
Lines.
Well, it was funny because at first I was like, "Really? They're sending me to the U?" And my wife said, "Honey, you study intellectual anti-Mormonism. You get to go to the epicenter."
The very heart.
and I mean, some of the best young adults in the church go to the University of Utah, and they're facing opposition and just the challenges of secularization and so on. I used to say that BYU was a home game and Salt Lake was an away game. And yet even in my time at BYU, I realized I don't think there are home games anymore. And particularly with the internet, the information/misinformation age that we live in, you're going to be bombarded whether or not you wanted it, whether or not you were looking for it. You can Google something for a church talk, and all of a sudden you're down the rabbit hole with whether it's clear anti-Mormonism or simply a depiction of things that is not something that you were prepared for. Yeah. So I've found since my time at BYU, I've been grateful for lots and lots of opportunities to work with students and work with other people around the world that are deep in faith crisis, struggling with things. I feel like that's one of the reasons I'm on the earth, just as a personal ministry, trying to build faith.
So have you read everything that there is to read attacking the church?
Nobody's read everything.
Right, but
a ton. And whenever something new comes out, for example, something new just did come out, and somebody reached out and said, "Have you heard about this?" I said, "No, because it just came out." But I immediately ordered the book, and I'm going to start reading it as soon as I finish a paper that I've got to submit today. It's never ending. It's a war of words and tumult of opinions that has always existed, and not just against our faith, but against faith in general. In some ways, anti-Mormonism is small fry compared to anti-faith, and to see what religion has faced since the days of the Enlightenment, particularly, it's a challenge. And Jesus said it would be this way. When it comes to last days, signs of the times, often we think of wars and rumors of wars and famine and pestilence and plague and so forth, but the one that comes up most frequently in Matthew 24 and in Joseph Smith Matthew is the deception of the elect according to the covenant. And so to think of deception as the defining sign of the times, with a target on those who have made covenants with God. If you're feeling that kind of opposition, in some ways take it as a compliment, that there's some concern there about what you might do with your faith, but also understand that it's right on schedule as we prepare for the coming of Christ.
It's a great insight, and just kind of means that like we're there, like it's coming. So
in fact, it's interesting because in Joseph Smith Matthew 24, the Lord talks about these things, and then he says, "And I tell you this before." So Jesus can prophesy anytime he wants to, but to call attention to the fact that he's prophesying, like, I need you to know in advance,
this is going to happen.
This is coming.
Right.
And he said the same thing when he was about to be betrayed by Judas Iscariot. Something's going to happen that might make you question your faith in me. It's going to look like I'm about to be blindsided by one of my chosen apostles. I'm not being blindsided. And so I'm telling you this in advance so that you realize that I was prepared, I saw it coming, and hopefully this experience that could shake your faith will actually serve to confirm it. And so to say the same thing when it comes to the shaking of faith in the latter days, I see a lot of people not worried about their own faith, but almost seeing someone else have a crisis of faith and it leading to their own. It's like, what do they know that I don't know? Or what's happening to my friends or my family members? And again, if there's a sense of, I told you this before, then it's, oh, you saw this coming and tried to prepare us for it. So I just need to be prepared.
Well, the New Testament in general is full of those prophecies of like, they hated me before they hated you. Like, this is not a new thing.
And to me, in that great point, Cam, and in the light of those kinds of comments, when he tells us to pray for those who despitefully use you and persecute you, and you're in good company, for so persecuted they the prophets that were before you. I think there's something powerful in the approach that we take if we can not only trust Jesus that it's coming, but trust Jesus that there's a way to respond to this in terms of our own faith, but a way to respond to them in terms of those who are attacking our faith. I think in some ways the worst thing we can do is respond to someone who attacks our faith in such a way that they feel justified in attacking us, and whereas when you turn the other cheek and you have an open heart and an open mind and are willing to hear someone's stories, there's a beautiful spirit that can come between the two of you, even though you disagree on really foundational things. You can see your shared humanity. You can understand where they're coming from as far as those who struggle in faith, and hopefully they can see where you're coming from in terms of holding to it.
I think there's a difference between an active turning the other cheek and a passive, like, we're not doing anything in response to this, we're just going to let it slide. Kind of, I feel like some people, the church in general, we have a tendency to sometimes let people walk all over our beliefs because we want to be Christ-like and let it, right? Is that justified? What would you?
That's a really good question, Cam. It reminds me actually of the church's response to the Book of Mormon musical, right? Where here the church is being slammed on Broadway, right? And it's all in the name of fun and it's humor. And actually, in my study of anti-religious rhetoric, the rhetoric of ridicule is the one that's most commonly employed. So this is old stuff. But to see when Parker and Stone first presented this idea of we're going to slam revealed religion by slamming the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They'll be our target, or they'll be our bullseye, but there's a much larger target we're dealing with here. Some people raised a similar concern of, well, aren't you afraid they're going to sue you? And Parker and Stone almost laughed and said, have you met any Latter-day Saints? Like they're like the nicest people in the world. And so, no, they're not going to sue us. Yeah. Some even said, but a musical? And again, they said, do you know any Latter-day Saints? I've never met any group of people that seem more prone or poised to burst into song than Latter-day Saints. And I remember hearing that going, okay, I'll take that.
That's fair.
They've got a point.
Fair, right?
They're not wrong.
But in terms of how the church responded to it, Parker and Stone were right. We didn't sue. What did we do? We took out ad space in Times Square. We took out space in the You've seen the musical. Now read the book. The book is always better. And I think there's value in humor in terms of diffusing some of those situations, and also just I think in some ways it leaves the other party, or even innocent bystanders, spectators, you're seeing something very different. Like, wow, there's a different spirit here. There's a different approach here. There's these people seem to be nice, and these ones seem to be a little bit not so much, and I think holding to higher moral ground, I think, is a powerful. I mean, ask Gandhi, ask Martin Luther King, ask Jesus, right? And I think, but back to your question, Cam, I think there is a difference between turning a cheek that nobody sees you turn, and sometimes it might come across as putting your head in the, ostrich-like head in the sand, and I don't have to deal with this, as opposed to confronting is too strong of a verb, but to face those,
to engage to some degree,
and maybe even engage, as long as engage doesn't lead to like, you're not, a soft engagement, but I think that's a good term in terms of, like, I want to have conversations with people who
meeting
are
them
struggling
somewhere, right?
Yeah, as one who talks about faith crisis constantly, and goes around and meets with people. I mean, every week, several people I will have Zoom calls with, or office visits with, or phone calls, email exchanges of just people that are wrestling with their faith and are crying out for help. Help my son, talk to my spouse, help me, please. There is, again, an endless supply of, or an endless demand, and a very limited supply, unfortunately. So I'm hundreds of emails behind. To let people talk, to have engagement, as you put it. But I do this so often, and I do firesides and priesthood leader trainings and all kinds of things on this topic, that there have been those who attack the church that now attack me for trying to help people navigate these kinds of things. And thankfully, I have really thick skin. And if you can balance thick skin with a soft heart, which is a hard combination, some people are thick-skinned and hard-hearted, and that's not good. Others are soft-hearted but thin-skinned, and that's not good for them, right? So if you can somehow balance the two and thicken that skin while maintaining a soft heart, then you can have conversations that are incredible. So for one instance,
helps to just not read the comments.
Well, but I do. It's dangerous, right? My wife is like, why do you do that? I'm like, well, I want my finger on the pulse of Latter-day Saints generally. And so there have been videos that attack videos that I've done, and kind of color commentary, play by play. And I watch it all, and I read all the comments, and my wife's like, honey, 10,000 people just slammed you, and all these people are swearing at you in the comment section. And it's like, it's okay.
Isn't that great?
Well, no, to me, it's like, it's okay, because I want to know where they're coming from.
Right.
Yeah.
And I actually spoke with one of the people who had done one of those videos and said, I think we'd understand each other if we knew each other. Can we do lunch? And we got together, and like a 3-hour conversation ensued that was really powerful, and just trying to understand where they were coming from.
Hard to hate someone when you get to know them.
Totally.
Yeah.
Very true.
And for me to explain, the conviction behind my efforts to share things that I'm not a traditional apologist, just trying to say this is there's no truth on the other side. They don't know what they're talking about. I want to honor where people are coming from, wherever they might be coming from. And it was amazing in that conversation to turn cheeks, but in an engaged kind of way.
Yeah.
Instead of just hear it, read the comments, get slammed, and just kind of pray hard to get past it emotionally. But instead to just say, you know what, this is a person who's hurting. And they're taking it out on the church. But I imagine they have experiences that are worth validating. And I know they have emotions worth empathizing with. And so if we could sit down together and hear their story, what hurt you? What experiences have you had? Pros, cons, good, bad, ugly, everything in between. And when did you decide to leave? When did God become a casualty? When did Christ become a casualty? When did you go on the offensive? Why did you choose this particular approach in attacking other people's faith?
Right.
What's the ultimate goal here? And again, not to do it offensively or defensively, just human to human. You have an experience that's worth hearing and a story that's worth sharing. And I think the more we're willing to have conversations like that, I think good will come of those kinds of conversations. Even if the other person doesn't decide to come rushing back to church, if we can in some ways diffuse the bomb,
right,
the emotional bomb that's ticking inside of them, help them feel seen, help them feel understood.
Because a lot of times the pressure is doing more damage than the actual concern.
Yeah.
It's like I'm stuck, I'm trapped, I don't know where to go. Everyone around me, right, I have no one to talk to.
Well, and that challenge of feeling stuck and nobody to talk to, often it begins. I love studying stage models of development and kind of the stage models of faith, but even the stage model of doubt in terms of where it begins. So often you have some question that's weighing heavy on you. You heard something, you read something, and you're right, Cam, you don't know who to ask. And in some ways, it's almost this noble self-sacrifice, almost a falling on your own sword, because it's like, I have questions that are killing me, but I am not going to ask anybody because I don't want someone else to feel what I'm feeling. I wish I'd never read that article. I wish I'd never listened to that podcast. I wish I'd never seen that thing. And I don't want to, will my asking a question spread some kind of doubt? And yet what happens? That noble self-sacrifice ends up almost spiritual suicide of, I'm not going to go see a doctor. I'm not going to go ask for help. And if it festers long enough, question then becomes concern, and concern starts to become doubt, and deal with that long enough without getting any help. And you start looking around and wondering you start asking what's wrong with me. And then you start asking what's wrong with everybody else.
Yeah.
I must know things that they don't know. And well, now I want them to know. And you almost overswing the pendulum going from, I don't want to ask anybody to, I want to tell everybody.
Yeah.
And then it becomes just that's when the bomb blows up.
So I guess like with that in mind, what sort of approach would you take to just help somebody who's in faith crisis? I guess more of someone who's like in the approach of like, I do have this question and I want to take a faithful approach.
Yeah.
How would you help someone who really is struggling with that kind of thing?
Great question. First of all, I would say, I would quote James 1:5. If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask. Now, ultimately, let him ask of God, right? And it's God who can give the ultimate answers, right? Yeah, liberally and upbraiding not, and so on. But often people have questions because it feels like God is distant. Sometimes they have questions because it feels like they've been asking God for certain things and it hasn't come through, right? And so there is this sense of, okay, for some reason the heavens are closed off. Anybody down here able to help me? But again, there's this sense of, I'm surrounded by people who absolutely know. I hear them every fast and testimony meeting, and they say they absolutely know. And they have no shadows of doubt. And yet I seem like I'm living in the shade constantly, right? And so there's this sense of solitude and isolation, and that's never good for human beings, right? Mental health, so on, spiritual health, all of those things can go haywire. It's interesting. I was talking to a friend, now a friend, someone that was in faith crisis that reached out and was basically saying, okay, you always describe this model of creation, fall, atonement. And creation, and that's the I'm
It's great. It's
fast in
like the honeymoon
testimony.
phase. Yeah,
Exactly,
you love
exactly.
it. Mhm.
But then you go into this fall stage where it's like, I don't know, what was I thinking when I was back in creation?
Mhm.
It's not as simple as I thought,
Yeah.
right? And that can lead to a lot of angst and a lot of struggle there. But keep on progressing until you get to the atonement stage. And the atonement stage will make sense of both a naive creation stage and a somewhat cynical fall stage. Okay, you end up loving everybody in the journey wherever they happen to be. It's fine. You've been there. And I was talking about this to somebody, and they said, "Yeah, but everyone in my ward is in creation stage." It's like, I'm in the fall stage. Fine, I get it. And there's pros and cons to that. But I look around, and again, I'm not going to ask them because either A, they don't know, or B, they think they know
Mhm.
everything. And there's no empathy, there's no understanding. There's such a dogmatism to their perspective. And so I'm not going to ask them a thing.
Hmm.
And it was interesting because I mentioned to him, said, sometimes in public, people in atonement stage and people in creation stage sound a lot alike
Mhm.
because there's conviction in both people. But if you listen closer, there will be in those in atonement stage, there will be a depth and an understanding that goes beyond dogmatism. They'll still have the conviction of, I know these things are true,
But it's intentional and it's been earned.
right,
Mhm.
Right.
and there's conviction without some kind of, you have to know these things yourself, like
Yeah.
like I do. There's
Mhm.
there's less judgmentalness. There's just a kindness and a softness and I mentioned to this person, so listen to people as they share comments in Sunday school, as they bear their testimony in sacrament meeting, and you'll hear that, I believe, is a safe conversation partner. There's and whether it's kind of intellectual understanding, like, wow, that person really knows their stuff, or maybe even better, there's a wisdom, kind of it's like when you talk to your grandma or your grandpa on the
'Cause
front
they've
porch
been
swing.
through
Yeah,
it.
they've been through stuff
Yeah.
because creation fall atonement is not always an intellectual journey. It's just a life journey,
Right.
Yeah.
right? And it's like, okay, I understand what it's like to feel like God hasn't answered your prayers
Mm.
because I've been through stuff like that.
Mhm.
That was my fall stage. It wasn't reading something intellectual and all of a sudden the history of the church blows up in my face. It was, where art thou?
Yeah.
And where is the pavilion that covereth thy hiding place? And yet I found him, and this is how I got there. And so again, in fact, the man responded, said, "You mean they're hiding in plain sight? The very people I need are right there around me." And yeah, they are. And so people out there that are looking for conversation partners, keep an eye out and an ear out. They're right there. And for all of us that are right here, drop some of those hints.
Right.
In fact, in some ways, don't just hint at it, make it obvious. Like,
Mhm.
hey, if you need a listening ear or someone to talk to, please come talk to me. That's probably why I have such a long waiting list, because it's not just because, well, this guy's got a PhD in
Right.
American religious history and he studies anti-religious rhetoric all the time. It's, here's somebody that's not going to make me feel bad for where I am. If you can be that kind of conversation partner, then to me, it's one of the great gifts we can give a fellow human being, that I'm here for you. And in fact, one more story. Can I share another
No,
story?
please.
We don't have a time limit. Yeah, we're good.
I had a conversation with a friend that was really struggling with something, and I didn't know the details,
Mhm.
and kind of closed. Didn't want to talk much about it, and so I sat down with this friend once and said, I need you to remember two things about me. Number one, I'm one of the least curious people you'll ever meet, as far as other people's business is
Mm.
Oh,
concerned.
okay.
Okay. I'm really curious about everything else out there. But in terms of what you're going through, I am not going to pry. I'm not going to get into people's business like that. On the other hand, I'm also one of the least judgmental people you'll ever meet. That I don't think less of people depending on what they're going through or where they've been. And I need you to know both sides for this reason. The fact that I'm so non-curious means you can tell me nothing and it's not going to change our friendship. On the other hand, on the non-judgmental side, you can tell me everything and it's not going to change our friendship. And I just need to establish those limits,
Parameters, right?
which means there are no limits, right? To say anywhere you happen to be on the spectrum is game with me.
Mm.
If you want to tell me everything or nothing or somewhere in between, I'm here for you. And I always will be. And that day he just kind of nodded and said, thanks. And nothing. So I'm like, okay, I'm going
All
on the
right.
non-curious side.
Right.
I gotta put my, prove it. But a few days later he called and said, you mean what you said? Oh yeah. And then
It all
he
came out.
unloaded,
There it is.
right? And so I think if we could just be a friend, an ear, a heart, a mind, a disciple of Christ that just lets people to, in some ways, it's almost like if we had some system where everybody had somebody they could go to. I don't know, call it ministering maybe.
That'd be really, really handy.
But if we did it in such a way that everyone knew they could ask, man, what a difference that would make.
Mhm. To me, it sounds incredibly Christ-like. Maybe it's just me, but just that approach of seeking for understanding and seeking to love instead of trying to get our own opinions or words in there, I think is just incredibly mature and
Yeah.
authentic.
Yeah,
I
because
love
I
that.
think what happens instead is the dogmatism of creation stage leads to a dogmatism of the other party in fall stage, and it's just fighting against it. And
Mhm.
often an apologist on one side and a polemicist on the other side is, bashing over things. And I'm amazed that when the Savior came to the Nephites in 3rd Nephi, one of the first things he says is contention's got to go.
Yeah.
We don't do that here. And the irony is, all the wicked, quote unquote, have already been, they're gone, right?
Mhm.
After 3rd Nephi 8, 9, 10. All you have in 3rd Nephi 11 is people prepared to meet the Savior. These are good people. And they have good questions like, what's the proper manner of baptism?
Mhm.
And what should we name the church? And how do you balance church discipline things with justice and mercy and so on? And Jesus is like, okay, you're good people. And these are really good questions. You're going about it in the worst possible way, And so can we just eliminate contention from the get-go and say, I'm just not going to go there. I refuse to be offended by the other person. When I work in with I do a lot of interfaith work.
Yeah.
And honestly, when I meet somebody who is so far in faith crisis that they've left the church and are now attacking the church, or even just left it and, whatever,
Mhm.
we all have friends and family in that situation, right? Mentally, if you can reframe that as our relationship is not member X member, it's not believer apostate,
Mm-hmm.
it's
Not us versus them.
Well, not us, them. It's now an interfaith dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, I found if I can
True.
reframe that as an interfaith dialogue, it's like that I can handle. I'm good at that. I don't shame a friend of another faith for what they believe. I'm actually curious, like,
Mhm.
what are your sources of truth that I'm missing out? What have you learned? And to approach it in that way, like, what have you learned since you've left the church?
Mm.
And I know there are still sources of truth out there, and you're probably reading them, listening to them, since you're not spending time in our sources of truth anymore.
Right.
Okay, but what are you reading that I'm not reading? What are you learning that I'm not learning? And
Just the curiosity.
Exactly. And even a little holy envy, not like, man, I wish I had left the church, not at all. But in terms of, wow, I wish I had more time for the incredible experiences that you're having, giving them the benefit of the doubt that they're a seeker, they're an honest person, they're good. People want to be known as good. And instead of just shaming, like, you left the church, what's wrong with you?
You're a bad person.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's more, there was probably something that happened in life that made it feel like this was the better option. And I don't agree with the final decision. I feel it's a better option, at least for me, to be right here. But let's understand each other, love each other, hear each other, and eliminate contention from the get-go. Again, if Jesus says even good people with good goals can go about it in wrong ways, then there's got to be a better way of doing it.
Right? Absolutely.
I'm thinking back to your model, your progression model, and looking for examples of that in the scriptures. And I'm thinking of the tree of life with the individual that's clinging to the rod versus the individual that's holding to the rod. And they're both doing the same thing, and on the outward surface, they might look the same, but one of them falls away, the one that's clinging out of fear.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that to me feels like the creation stage where it's like, I haven't stepped away. I don't know what's outside. And so I'm just,
This is all I have.
I'm just locked in here and I don't know. And then that's not sustainable.
Yeah.
And I feel like those people, a lot of them, when they leave, they come back, they hold back, and they're like, okay, now I understand why I'm holding to the rod, and I see where I'm going.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. And I think you nailed it when you said, if that's motivated by fear, and I'm just clinging to this because I'm so scared of what else is out there. It's interesting. There's actually a passage, a couple phrases in 1 Nephi 8, where it talks about people who've been clinging, who actually made it to the tree and partook of the fruit, but immediately they start casting their eyes about because they're hearing something from across the river, right? And it's this mocking of the people in the great and spacious building. So again, rhetoric of ridicule.
Which is the most common.
Exactly.
Right?
If I'm not going to go on some commando raid across the river and drag you over to the great and spacious building. I can't. There is a gulf that separates, right?
Right.
But if I can say something in such a way that you feel shame, I can play on your emotions, leverage some of that laughter against you, and then you do it to yourself. You drop the fruit, and then you wander away in these forbidden roads and are lost. But what's interesting is the fact that they're casting their eyes about from the start of what are people going to think about me?
What do they see that I don't?
What do they know that I don't know? What do they see what do they have that I don't? Man, that's a great spacious building over there. I mean, what do they got over there that I'm missing out on? And they sure sound sure of themselves, and I'm starting to wonder where I'm at. Compare that to Lehi, because the phrase is identical. That when Lehi partakes of the tree, of the fruit of the tree, he casts his eyes about to see where his family is. Because there are people out there that need what I just tasted. And if I can help them find it, man,
exact same action, completely different motive.
Exactly. Wow. And different emotion driving that behind, right? Where but both are thinking about other people.
Right.
But instead of what are they thinking about me, it's what do I have to offer them? And to me, I like alliteration. And to me, it comes down to a bunch of P's. That if we can hold on to these P's, do I trust God's power? Do I trust his plan? Do I trust his purposes? Do I trust his process? And maybe the hardest, do I trust his pace? Because so often it's this fear, this clinginess that leads to our dogmatism in terms of what we believe and in terms of how we approach other people. Like, you don't ask that. Don't read this.
Right.
Don't check that stuff out. And it's well-meaning parents and friends and leaders that are just wringing their hands out of worry that they're gonna fall. Whereas, are we really that unconfident about the gospel of Jesus Christ? It's like this.
There's a passage in Alma that I'm just remembering from my mission.
Yeah.
And it stood out to me at the time because it was after a miracle, I think maybe 35, somewhere in the Book of Mormon. But the passage said they were commanded that they should marvel not, neither should they doubt. And I was like, there's the spectrum. Both are equally lacking in faith.
Yeah.
Because they both come from a place of instability where you're like, wait, I believed this, but I didn't think it would actually happen. Yeah. There's the marveling.
Like, what? This is true?
Right. This is crazy.
That's what
wow.
This whole time. Yeah.
And then doubt's obviously the other side of that.
I love that, Cam.
Yeah.
Great.
So it's just similar feeling of like, maybe that's the creation side is you're like, okay, I think I'm like really excited. And so I'm going to latch onto everything that comes out that justifies my beliefs. And I'm going to like, that's an insecurity that's coming from a place of insecurity.
That's really good. That's really good. I think there is this beautiful, there's stability, there's security, you can finally be outside yourself, you know? Again, you're casting your eyes about for their sake, not for your own. And it's like, this is the best thing that's ever happened to me. The gospel of Jesus Christ. My wife asked me once, because I spend so much time with other people at the expense of my own family.
Right.
Because it's hard when you're in what they call the helping professions. because there's somebody that needs me.
Always,
Right.
yeah.
And so at one point, my wife asked me, and it wasn't in an accusatory way. It wasn't in a pity party sort of way. She
Mhm.
just asked me, like, honestly, honey, why do you do this? She wasn't checking motives. It's just like, I really want to, I love you. I love what you're doing. I totally support you in this. You're doing what God put you on the earth to do. I know that. I married that.
And then you bent over and threw the
why are you
starfish
doing
back to the ocean.
Well, yeah, and it's constant starfish,
Right.
right? Constant. But she said, why do you do this? And it was interesting it was just a sweet experience of like soul to soul, husband to wife, to say to her, because life is so hard that the gospel of Jesus Christ is the only thing that gets me through it. The things that she and I have faced together, the things that we've dealt with our kids, just life wrecks you at times. And to just say to her, it's the one thing that's got me through. And it's the only thing that's going to help solve the world's problems, that's going to help confirm overcome their fears, their challenges. It is the answer to everything. And I don't say that naively. I don't say it dogmatically.
Mhm.
I say it from hard fought personal experience.
Mhm.
And it's like, man, when people let it go because they didn't know what they had that whole time,
Mhm.
that to me is tragic. And it's going to lead to greater tragedies for them.
Mm.
This isn't about the church numbers, and the worth of souls is great in the sight of God. I feel that deeply. It's what motivates me to do everything that I do. And when you have that sense of stability and security in all those P's, that God's got this and he knows what he's doing and it's all going to work out. And I just have to trust the process as people wrestle with these things and trust his pace, that prodigals return,
Right.
that we figure it out, that God is at work and he can afford to play the long game. It's nice to be eternal,
It's a
and
long
This
time.
is true,
We got
right?
Plenty of time to figure it out.
But even in our theology and in
Right.
our practice, we can afford to be patient. We believe in the spirit world. We believe in, I don't know of another religious theology that can afford its members, its believers, more patience and more hope than what the restored gospel of Jesus Christ gives us. And so, as I often tell my students, maybe I said it in your class, Wilson, as I've said to people who are just clinging on family members with one hand and clinging on the iron rod with the other, and it's clingy both ways, say, permanent bad news is against my religion. I just don't believe in it.
Right.
I two phrases from Joseph Smith, two different quotes, but mash them together, and it's a beautiful fusion. In one point, Joseph talks about God's paternal regard. In another, he talks about God having made ample provision to save all of his children. And so if this is a father with paternal regard who has made ample provision for his children, then get out of his way. Allow him to do his work. Twice he says to Nephi, I am able to do mine own work. It's like,
I got it.
I got this. Mere mortality, humanity, worrying about omnipotence. Come on. Right. And back to your point, Cam, if we know it's true, then I don't need to doubt the process. And I don't even need to, well, I'm going to marvel
A little bit.
but in a more marvelous kind of
Right.
way, as opposed to like, what? That actually worked?
Absolutely.
No, there's something to this that goes far beyond our mortal fears.
So in my experience, one of the adversary's biggest tools is convincing us that we're the only ones that feel a certain way.
Yeah. Isolation.
Absolutely. And I feel like for a lot of people that may be watching, there's this feeling of like, okay, this is nice for everybody else, but like my concerns and my fears are deeper. And if they ever saw the light, then everyone would freak out. Right.
Yeah.
What are the things that you see that are the most common fears that people have and the most doubts and whatnot that you deal with? And what do you say to them to help them work through that?
I think there's a couple of questions there. First, to the point of people feeling alone. There's a great verse in 1 Corinthians 10. It's talking about temptation, but I think the same applies to doubt and concern and so on, where Paul says that there is no temptation but what is common to man. So don't ever feel like I'm the only one that deals with this. It's common to man. In our mortal condition, the human condition includes physical illness, mental illness, spiritual illness, ups and downs, roller coaster, the whole bit. So don't ever feel like you're the only person who's ever felt this way or been tempted with that or has wondered about this or questioned that. It's common to man. But then the next phrase from Paul, but God is faithful. And it's the same verse where he says, and with the temptation will prepare a way for you to escape. And I would, in terms of, if we go from temptation to doubt or to epistemology or how we view things and learn things, God is faithful. With the question, he has prepared a way to receive an answer, right? So if you can know that I'm not alone in this, horizontally, there are other people that have wondered the same thing, and I'm not alone vertically, God is faithful and he's here for me, then I can trust the process and come unto him and ask other people and just engage in the wrestle. And I think in some ways, maybe that's why it needs to be this way in the last days. Not just that it's gonna be this way, but it needs to be this way. Because if we're ever gonna pull off Zion, we're gonna have to figure out how to become one heart and one mind and really engage with each other's differences and challenge and struggles and so on. And if we're trying to pull off that kind of Zion, but also have enough faith on the earth to allow the Savior to return, I mean, that to me is one of the most haunting questions Jesus ever asked. This is Luke 18. When the Son of Man returns, will he find faith upon the earth?
Wow.
Like, is anybody going to believe when I come back? Eventually, every knee shall bow and every tongue confess. But will they choose to because of faith, as opposed to being compelled to because of obvious circumstance?
And it doesn't
I'm here.
say the timeline between when he comes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But in some ways, then, is my faith and my helping other people with their faith, does that allow for the second coming to occur? Is that part of what paves the way for Zion to be established upon the earth? And so, on the one hand, to the other part of your question, are there some common questions, common concerns? Sure. There's the age-old laundry list of concerns as far as church history and so on is concerned. The gospel topics essays, in some ways, when people ask, well, what are people asking? Well, like, look at what the church is answering.
Right.
Here's these things. But the irony is, so often, especially when I listen to those who attack the church and people that are telling their stories about their faith crisis and their departure, there are ready-made laundry lists of doubts and concerns, and just fire them off. Rapid fire, machine gun, just brrr, and here's all these things.
What about?
Exactly.
Right.
And in some way, I call it death by a million pinpricks. None of those things on their own will bleed out the victim. None of them are fatal in isolation. But once you get enough of them, you don't want to take the time to deal with that issue in isolation. And pretty soon, well, there's all this smoke, there must be fire, and I'm bleeding all over the place, and it sure hurts, and so I'm just going to leave. And yet, typically, there's some underlying experience, perception, emotions that come as a result of that experience, based on the perceptions of the experience, that lead them. I mean, so much of it is psychology and not history or theology. And so while there are a common litany of questions and concerns, sometimes I'll even ask people, that's a good question. Is it yours? Is this really what you're wondering? Or is this somebody else's question that you latched a hold of because you're going through something hard and want to have something to, distract the conversation or to
Blame,
again justify,
right?
sometimes blame
Justify,
others, or just justify that I'm struggling and so are other people, and here's a bunch of the reasons why. I'm like, totally, but are those your reasons why? And if they are, great, but what is it about your own experience and perception that gives that question so much angst? And then just hear and listen and let the layers peel away until you see behind the question the questioner. right? And it's you. It's been you under there this whole time, right? And it finally pokes through in such a way that you can meet on holy ground, honestly. So often when I'm working with people, I just want to take my shoes off because we're in the middle of a mess, not of their own causing,
Mm-hmm.
and that they're just dealing with stuff and struggling through things. And finally, I know what that burden is, so I can bear it with them. Finally, I see why they're mourning, and man, I can't help but mourn right alongside. And when they're ready to be comforted, oh, I want to be able to help give them that kind of comfort. And so there are definitely some common
Themes
questions,
and-
concerns,
right?
themes, right?
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
But again, the worth of the individual human soul. In that lunch that I had with the person who had
Mhm.
attacked me and attacks the church, I said to them, I'm a little jealous that you can be both efficient and effective, because you can spread half-truths or teach some decontextualized history,
Mm-hmm.
and do it over the airwaves to the point that you are cracking eggshells by the carton,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And it's like, free the chicks. They're trapped in the egg and they don't know everything in there. And people are keeping them where and so crack. And all these helpless chicks
They're just running in circles.
come out
Yeah.
prematurely. They're
Yeah.
not even running because they never developed the wing strength
Mm.
to push themselves out of the egg, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hatching is a very individual thing when done correctly, right? And so I said to them, you have the luxury of being efficient and effective. You can effectively move the masses, but then that leaves people like me with the mess of trying to help a chick develop wing strength after the fact.
One at a
Mhm.
time.
And it has to be done one at a time.
Mhm.
Because how far along were you in your growth before you were forced out of the egg?
Mhm.
Was there any yolk still in there that could have made a difference?
Mhm.
Were you prepared for all this stuff that's out here? I told this new friend of mine, I'm not trying to reinforce the eggshell. I'm not trying to keep people
Mhm.
no, ask your questions. Believe me, let's talk. I love studying this stuff. Even the way things that people are attacking. I want to know these things, and I totally trust God and his power and his process and everything. But I think there are ways to communicate through the shell. That's what I said to them. You don't have to crack.
Yeah.
You can tell, like, hey, if there's any yolk in there, lick it up. It's harder to come by out here. Take advantage of this creation stage where innocence and identity formation and sense of security in a world not of your own creating, because once you come out, oh, it's awesome. Wings, you can fly out here, but you got to have the wing strength to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So even when you feel alone in there and you're pushing and I promise I'm right here. I'm here to help. I'll be the first one to high feather you, once you come out, because you made it through the process, right? But this efficiency, effectiveness, I'm the most inefficient person ever because it's one-on-one.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
And while conversations like this are helpful to be able to hopefully plant some seeds and let other people take up the work themselves, and I do in my own podcast and firesides and priesthood leader trainings and all this kind of stuff is an attempt to be a little more efficient.
Mhm.
You were in my class, Wilson, and we had 60 people in there.
Mm-hmm.
Teacher-student ratio, not bad. But you come to my office, and teacher-student ratio is 1-to-1. You can't beat that.
Mhm.
It's the least efficient, most effective.
So
thing.
true.
And that's honestly, I think that's the Lord's way.
Well, just along this vein, because you've worked with so many people who have experienced faith crisis, have you noticed a common catalyst between like what helps people get out of the fall phase and into the atonement phase? Because I know there's so many different experiences that people have, but is there kind of one common thread that helps
Yeah.
people?
The most common and the best, the most foundational, is an experience with God. That's it. It's like, whoa, now I'm marveling. This is real.
Mhm.
Like this, I don't live in a horizontal universe. I live in a vertical one that is breathtaking. Often when I work with people and they come with me, well, I've got this question and answer this. I'm like, okay, awesome. Do you still believe in God? And they're like, whoa, we're going with atheism? I'm like, well, you tell me. Are we? I'm just trying to see, there are some cracks in your foundation. Obviously, that's why you're here.
But is the foundation still there?
Yeah. How
Mhm.
deep do those cracks go? Because if we're just talking about some church history thing up on the surface, but the cracks go all the way down to God, then we're wasting our time talking about church histories, because who cares about a church? This would purely be a man-made organization, right?
Yeah.
Some social construction of our little horizontal reality. Whereas, man, if there's a God, and it's so interesting, I'll often ask, so tell me about some of your experiences with God. And half the time, all they talk about is their experiences with the church. And I'm like, awesome. I've got lots of experiences with the church too, good, bad, everything in between.
Mhm.
I didn't ask about the church. And some people have such a hard time even getting past church talk to God talk. I mean, your generation is famous for the statement, I'm spiritual but not religious. But often I'll say, are you sure? Because based on what you've been telling me, I wonder if you've only been religious and haven't been spiritual. Like you don't,
Put the cart before the horse.
right? You've been doing the dance steps, but you never, have you heard the music?
Right.
Mhm.
Like, do you really? And to me, the great turning point is just come to know God and then let him work his wonders. Because God will then let you know that, you know what, I love you. That's a huge step. And I do care how you turn out. So sin, yeah, it's a thing. But because sin is a thing, because I'm here and I care how you live, I have a solution for it. It's my only begotten Son. So now I can go from theist to theist who thinks God cares how I live, like a guilty theist, to a Christian. And then I can ask, okay, does Christ use churches? If so, is there a church that helps me tap into his atoning grace in such a way that I can overcome sin, which is what God intended for me from the start? It's this whole, here's
You've
the
built the
layers of the
pyramid.
foundation,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
There's the layers of it. And to see people start that process, it's like, let's dig through all the other stuff and get back down to the bedrock.
Mhm.
Think about Alma the Younger and the Sons of Mosiah. And here's a prophet parent worried sick about his boy. And he doesn't say, Heavenly Father, please help my son gain a testimony of the church so he stops destroying it. When the angel comes, he says, your father's been praying with much faith that I would come, and somehow that God would, not that I would come, he didn't know the details, but he just prayed that God would, that you would be convinced of the power and authority of God. That's it. And then things happen from there. But I love just that God isn't going to hijack our agency. And as a parent or friend or loved one, I'm not going to hijack their agency either. But if there's something that could happen for them to experience in some way the power and authority of God, his existence, his divine reality, his paternal regard, wow, then let the process unfold in God's time and in God's way. I see it over and over and over. And once that first step happens, it might be slow. It might take a long time. Construction often does. It may be inefficient. Let it be effective. And I'm worried maybe the opposite. Maybe we're in this mess because we've been trying the opposite. We've been trying to be efficient in cranking out converts, or efficient in just making sure our kids think they know it's true, instead of effectively allowing people, nurturing faith, planting seeds, Alma 32, right? And just letting them grow.
That's beautiful.
Can you plug your podcast?
So I just do a Come Follow Me podcast called Unshaken. My hope is to help establish unshaken faith in Jesus Christ through his word. I never intended to be, I'm not as talented as you guys. I never intended, I don't look good on screen. Okay. And so I never intended to become some kind of podcaster, influencer, any of that. I'm just a teacher. At core, I'm a teacher. And when COVID hit and I couldn't teach, I had to teach. So I said, fine, I'll just film the lessons and throw them up there, and a couple of hundred Institute students hopefully will stick with me and keep studying Scripture. And I've been so amazed at the number of amazing saints out there that hunger for the Word of God and are willing to study it and wanting to study it verse by verse, phrase by phrase,
Word
even
by
to the-
word,
yeah,
syllable by syllable.
Right, yeah. To the point that I think the record was like a 7.5 hour episode once, you know.
Wow.
It's like, okay, here's all of 1 Samuel. Boom, you know, 7 hours later. Okay, you're class dismissed. But again, to me, it's I just want faith to be on the earth when the Savior comes.
There you go.
And I know the best way, or I believe that the best way to do that is through His Word. In the beginning was the Word. So if you want to be with God and like God, start with the Word.
Thanks so much for coming on.
My pleasure.
And thank you guys for watching, for tuning in. Of course, please check out Unshaken Saints, because there's fantastic content for all of you scriptorians who really want to dive deep there. But thanks for watching. Please feel free to let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and we'll see you next time.